Welcome into the College Football Overtime Podcast. My name is Garrett Chapman. His name is Abe Gordon. It was a week of pure chaos in 13. This was unbelievable. What we just saw, it was incredible. Lots of conferences potentially getting big-time answers here, and we are going to discuss it right here on the Week 13 reaction show. It's Abe Gordon and Garrett Chapman here, getting you ready for all of that action. It was just unbelievable. Just thrilled with everything. And I love college football for that reason. Abe Gordon, we're going to talk about all of it, but how you doing, buddy?
Yeah, I thought the games yesterday were relatively calm and slow. I took a nap most of the day. Did I miss anything? I assume business as usual and everything's clear and obvious. No,
Yeah, assuming you're in the Big Ten for the most part. It was
I guess.
up there in the Big Ten, and lots of teams very fortunate to be playing the likes of UMass and Wofford and or even on bye if you're Oregon. So lots of very interesting games. Let's jump right into the first big one. This was the number one matchup of the weekend, right? College Game Day was there. Fox was out there. The big noon kickoff. Indiana and Ohio State. Ohio State takes care of business in a way that a lot of people fully expected them to. All the money was pretty much coming in on Ohio State. The public was all over Ohio State. Who was Indiana? And I think that was the big question that a lot of people were asking. They said that is the barometer going to basically stay the same? I mean, like, look, is this team going to continue being what Indiana was? You know, the team that was beating teams by 30 plus points every single game. Well, no. In fact, they were the team that was getting beat by 30 plus points. It was not very pretty here for a game, but if you look at it this way, if you take away two certain plays, right, at the end in the first half, where Indiana muffs a punt, the punter it just goes straight through his hands. Ohio State scores soon after that. And then you have a punt return for a touchdown. That's 21-7. It was a very quick score for Ohio State. I feel like they lived most of this game, at least in the first half, when it was still a reachable target. They lived in Indiana's side of the field. Even Indiana couldn't get out of their own side. They had their opening drive where they go right down the field, and it felt very like, okay, Indiana, like what do we got here? Ohio State then made some adjustments and shut them down. It was sort of an ugly game for Indiana overall, and you could talk about those 14 points, but ultimately, when you only score 15 points, it tells me that you had a lot more issues than you did answers. It was not a very pretty game for Indiana. I don't think it's going to cost them anything when it's all said and done. Ohio State's just a really good football team. They're one of the best teams in America, and I think that's pretty much obvious after this one. Indiana, they played well enough, in my opinion, to make their way into the college football playoff, but they also got a lot of help elsewhere in the college football landscape. So they may not even have to worry at all. A one-loss Big Ten team, in my opinion, should make it regardless. I don't think it should really even be much of a question, but some people are going to ask it either way. But I am not. Indiana falls, but Ohio State and Indiana should be in the college football playoff without too much of an issue. But Ohio State now just one win away from clinching another berth in the Big Ten championship game. But it's their first one since, I believe, 2020. So it's been a little while for the Buckeyes. But now they just got to beat Michigan, and that's where all focus turns for the Buckeyes.
Well, a couple of things here. I agree with you about the 14 points. I think this game, while it was still a comfortable Ohio State victory, is a little bit misleading score-wise. I think that was just a tale of blunders that you haven't seen Indiana make for the most part this season. So maybe it could have been a little bit more competitive, but quite frankly, up front, it was not competitive. Ohio State's defensive line, when bringing more than four, and that was key to what they were doing yesterday, absolutely shut down Indiana, and Indiana did not have enough time. Curtis Rourke did not have time to challenge Ohio State down the field in what's probably one of their bigger weaknesses, matching up man-to-man on the outside. Indiana had moments where they looked like they could have taken advantage early in the game. They had a guy wide open, not wide open, but open, and he just didn't connect. And after that, Ohio State started blitzing, and Indiana just could not handle it. Five sacks, 8 tackles for loss in this game, and some ugly turnovers. Some couldn't get out of their own way stuff. And you do that against a team like Ohio State on the road. If you're Indiana, that's going to cost you the game. And it certainly did. I think for Ohio State, you're still going to look at the run game. Probably not quite good enough against Indiana. And that's probably by design based on what Indiana does up front.
Yeah.
But Ohio State with a convincing win. I think Indiana is safely still in this, especially after the other results we'll talk about as we get to it. But the other question for me in regards to Indiana is what you need to look like against Purdue, because you scored 15 points against Michigan in a win. You scored 15 points against Ohio State in a loss. People are going to have questions if you don't tear it up against Purdue. And Purdue's one of the worst teams in all of college football. So I would look for Indiana to get back on top there. Certainly disappointing, not just in the result, but coming off of a bye to perform like you did, less than 70 yards passing from Curtis Rourke is certainly not going to get it done. But there were plays to be had for Indiana, and they just couldn't make them in this one. But I'm not ready to bury them just yet. I think they got a little bit more fight in them. So we'll see how it plays out. But look, you're now in a position where you're potentially hosting a first-round matchup, maybe going on the road. It just kind of depends how the seeds fall out. But they're going to be included as long as they get past Purdue. But Ohio State has secured their spot as they are one of the top 5 teams, and here we go.
Yeah, it was a game of field position, in my opinion. I mean, this was a game that, Ohio State had. I mean, because Indiana really did do a good job. If you look at the numbers, Indiana held Ohio State's offense to probably one of its worst outputs of the season. This isn't just an overwhelming beatdown like the score says. And it's just the fact that Indiana's offense was not able to get it done. And that's where I get into some worrisome territory for the Hoosiers, if I'm being honest. That is where I don't think that's going to hold up over the course of a college football playoff. But that's
real quick, though. I kind of almost parlay it to what we saw Ole Miss do to Georgia's offensive line. Like the Georgia O-line held up much better against Tennessee. I think sometimes for whatever reason, it's just not there that day. I do wonder in another situation, in another game, if their O-line holds up a little bit better, Indiana's, how much more dangerous would they be against Ohio State?
Yeah, but I also have an issue with that, just in the sense that if you look at Georgia and compare them to what Georgia did against Ole Miss, but then what Georgia's done against Tennessee, against Texas, against other elite offense or defensive lines, they've held their own, and Indiana's really only faced 2 elite, I would say, defensive lines, or really above average defensive lines. Michigan's really good on the defensive line. For all of the issues that Michigan has as a whole, that defensive line unit is one of the best in the country, and they got shredded against Michigan. The Indiana offensive line, I should say. The same thing happened, in probably worse in this game. I mean, this was ugly very quickly because Indiana couldn't move the ball. Like, I'm looking up here and looking at these, just their the plays. I'm just looking through the box right here. So it's like, you have, once you had the touchdown drive for 11 plays, you had 6 plays and punt. You had 3 plays and fumble. You had 8 plays where you lose 4 yards and you turn it over on downs. You have the punt return for a touchdown, of course, after you only have 3 plays and you have to punt. And then you get the ball back and it's 3 plays and punt. It's 5 plays and punt. It's 3 plays and punt. You have the 15 plays for the touchdown, but it's in the fourth quarter and the game is over. You got shredded. You had no opportunity to do anything. I'm worried about the Indiana offense. The Indiana defense, I think, on the other hand, I think it played really well, all things considered. And you had a couple of drives there late in the game that really iced it and put it over. But I felt like that was more a situation where the defense was just put in a really bad spot. They had a lot of short fields that they had to defend early in this game. And then late, your offense couldn't stay on the field. You're exhausted. It's done. And then it wasn't until very late in this game that Indiana even took back at some of this time of possession. So the TOP says it's pretty much even, but if you watch the game, it was not even up until the very end of the fourth quarter when they had that 7-minute drive, just to kind of make the score look a little bit more appealing. But ultimately, I think it's all a moot point. Both of these teams are going to make it through. The SEC just cannibalized itself, and the Big 12 is pretty much doing the same. So I think they got a lot of answers out of this game, but Indiana, I think they're going to have a lot of questions here now, moving into the playoff. And it's like, hey, is this just who you are? You mentioned Purdue, Abe. You're not going to get any answers against Purdue. You need to go out there and win definitively against a bad football team. But you're not going to get any answers. Just beat them and then move into the postseason and hope you don't get a really physical bunch in the first rounds. My worry for them is if they face a Georgia team or they face even Notre Dame or something like that, a team that likes to pound the rock a little bit and really get physical up front. That's where I get a little bit more worried for them. But any more thoughts on this one before we move on?
Just ultimately what happened in this game is largely what everyone thought would happen. It's what most of us expected. And so we move forward from there for both teams.
Yeah, let's quickly mention another game that happened in the Big Ten. Penn State, they escaped Minnesota 26-25. Guts from James Franklin. It's kind of a break from his mold. What we normally see from James Franklin is a very conservative coach, somebody who doesn't really want to take a lot of unnecessary risks. But I guess this one was necessary. He goes for it on fourth down on a wild fake punt, and he gets it, and then ends up rolling through and icing out the clock. But this is another example of this game in particular. Minnesota probably was the better football team in this game. Penn State playing on the road, not really ever getting comfortable here in this one. Minnesota, they jumped out to an early lead in this, but it was Penn State who comes out on top. But it's another instance of them just not really getting the rushing attack going. What I did like in this one, though, is Drew Aller was able to pick up some of the slack. That's something that I've always had a bit of a worry for them, is if Drew Aller isn't 100%, Drew Aller isn't able to the passing attack in particular isn't able to pick it up and really carry the load if the rushing attack doesn't. Nick Singleton and Katrin Allen was held to just 10 yards in this game, only had 7 carries. But I also, the final thing about this is Tyler Warren's the best tight end in football. I don't think that's even remotely close. He has another 102-yard game in this one, and he just came up with clutch catch after clutch catch after clutch catch. He is one of the best offensive players in all of college football. And I mean, look, you're in a conference with Jeremiah Smith and everybody else in Ohio State and Oregon and Evan Stewart and Tezwa, all those other beasts, right? And Tyler Warren is right up there with all the best ones in terms of the top playmakers and clutch players in the Big Ten. But look, big win for Penn State. All you got to do is hold the line, and you're going to maintain, and you're going to push through. And they've had a couple instances of like this. You have the game against USC earlier in the season. You've had a couple of games where you just sort of like kind of skate by, but you do just enough. And they win over Minnesota 26-25.
Yeah, look, the fact that they were competitive against Ohio State in that loss is doing a lot of heavy lifting in Penn State, avoiding the same questions that Texas is getting asked. Penn State was not good enough. I don't know what Minnesota's doing in allowing a fake punt. The important thing is just get the ball back. You should have been able to defend that. You should have been ready, I guess. But that's neither here nor there. Penn State's lifeline this season is short. Tyler Warren's not good enough to carry this team through the playoffs. He might be the best tight end in football. He's not Brock Bowers, and I mean that with all due respect. He's way too easy to game plan against. He's just not dominant enough. And with the run game, like you singling out, and I agree with you, if it's not going to take over on its own, if you could focus defensively on Tyler Warren, I don't know where this team's going to go. I mean, he had over 30% of the yards from Drew Aller in this game. They're just not impressive. They're just not impressive. It feels like their time is coming. It won't happen until the first round of the playoffs and maybe the second, but their time's coming. They're not destined for a long run, in my opinion.
They've just got a lot of holes, and the defense doesn't do a lot to do. I mean, you got some like Abdul Carter and guys like that on that defense. They're good. Like, this is a good football team, but it's not an elite playoff team. It's not the number 4 team in America either.
Yeah,
like the Big Ten as a whole. I've had a lot of issues with the Big Ten just in general, and whether it's intentional or not, it's not the point. It's the fact that you've got a lot of teams. Ohio State's really the only team that's been effectively tested across the Big Ten. They're the only team that played Oregon. They're the only team that played Indiana. They're the only team that played Penn State.
Well, but we just sat here and said Penn State's no good.
I didn't say no good. I didn't say no good.
No, just hear me out, because it's the same discussion though. Like, why are we suggesting that Ohio State's record's impressive if we continually dump on Indiana? They haven't played anyone. If we continually dump on Penn State, they haven't played anyone. Like this is the discussion Georgia fans need to be having about Texas. Like, you're propped up if you're Georgia by saying, look what we did to Texas. And then at the same time, you dump on Texas for not having played anyone. Well, that means that your win over a number 1 team, as impressive as it was, really wasn't that impressive, because you don't believe Texas is any good. Like, it doesn't make any sense.
It's a lot of circuitous arguments.
Yeah.
They go in circles and they're not
But you can sit
super
here and
effective.
talk to me about these top 10 matchups that Ohio State has, and Oregon's Oregon, fine. But, like, I mean, okay, if you want to sell me on Indiana and Penn State being top 5 matchups, and then at the same time question the entire resume that got Penn State and Indiana to being a top 5 ranked team, like, okay, like, that doesn't do you much good, but sure.
I hear you. No, I hear you. But it's we'll just see. We're gonna have a lot of. Well, that's the beauty of this playoff that we're about to have is we're gonna get a lot of answers. And look, the SEC is. I'm not. This isn't a segment about the SEC right here, but SEC had a pretty brutal day of its own. So you talk about those cupcake games or the games you're supposed to get by. There's a lot of value in moving through and winning the games, even when you're not at your best. And Penn State has done that, and they've done that over the course of the season. There's a reason they're 10-1. They have another opportunity next week, and as long as they get through 11-1, that'll be enough to get them into the playoff. And once they get there, then we'll figure it out from there. Another game here up in the Northeast United States. This one actually happening at a baseball stadium. Don't know why they continue to do that, but Notre Dame, they beat Army 49-14. This was a game that was never really a football game. It was exactly the game that I worried it would become. Bryson Daly does everything he can to make this a good game, but it's just Notre Dame's just a better football team. It's a different class of team here. They're not really. They don't belong on the same football field. All due respect to Army, all due respect to Navy, and all those the service academies and everything else. But there's a reason that you play. These are Power 4 football teams, and this is a group of 5 team playing in the top 10 or a team against in the top 10. It's just they got exposed, and it's really what happened here.
Too big, too strong, too fast, too physical. That's what happened in this game. No one's surprised. Still impressive to watch Notre Dame. They're growing on me, man. They might be an interesting team come playoff time.
Yeah.
Got to get past SC first.
Yes, you do. Notre Dame's got a sneaky game coming up next week with Southern California. But Notre Dame, like, you score 14 points. It's just one of those methodical types of games where you just go down the field and you beat them. And you just lean on them. And that's something that they've done very effectively this year. It's what they did to Georgia Tech. It's what they did to Louisville. Louisville a little bit more theatrics in that one. But this is another team where I look at the strength of schedule and the teams that you've played. I don't think it's fully their fault necessarily. I mean, like they're kind of stuck in that ACC model where they have to play a certain number of games, and then you have these other matchups where USC's fallen flat. Florida State, you had them on the schedule. They've fallen flat. Notre Dame had these teams on the schedule, but no, they just were not very good. And I think Notre Dame is one of those squads who we're going to learn a lot about them, but not until we get to the playoffs. This is a team that I hope doesn't get that 5 seed, which I feel like is the best seed in the playoffs, at least I honestly think it's the best seed overall. But you could have the 5 seed playing whoever the Big 12 champion is, or maybe the Boise State or something like that in the first round, and then moving through and getting the worst of the 4 conference champions in that second round. That might be Notre Dame who gets the benefit of that bounce, but that's a different discussion for later on in the season. They got to get through SC, Abe, like you said. Any more thoughts on this one? I just wanted to mention it. All right, let's go down to the SEC where there was absolute carnage. This is the first one, Oklahoma beating Alabama, but I actually had 3 games last week. If you go back and watch, I had 3 games that I said they should be on upset alert. I said one of these teams is going to lose. All 3 of them lost. Maybe it's a kiss of death. I don't know. I doubt that I have that much influence. Maybe they were just listening to me, though. But let's start right here in one of the worst games that I think I've seen Alabama play. Oklahoma just takes it to Alabama. Jalen Milroe, he looked bad in this football game. There were times where he's been shaky, Abe. There were times where he's been not super effective. But this was an instance where I would say really for the first time that Jalen Milroe was just a bad quarterback. He throws 3 interceptions in this game, only 164 yards passing. They don't run the ball with any level of effectiveness. And it's nothing really necessarily that Oklahoma did outside of just get short fields and take advantage of turnovers. And then they ran the ball. Jackson Arnold, he just ran and nobody had it. They didn't have any answers for him. He finishes this game 131 yards on the ground. Xavier Robinson also takes off as well, but This was one of the worst games I've ever seen Alabama play. At least of the last 15 years. This was a game where they just got outclassed and beat down in every phase of the game.
Yeah, I was surprised at just how ineffective, especially because we talked about it, like getting Jalen Milroe to use his legs, and they tried, and it just wasn't there. Now, there's still some questions about how they run the ball with Jalen Milroe that I guess it's up to Kalen DeBoer to figure out. But Oklahoma was all over them, and most of the points Oklahoma scored was a direct result of Alabama's offense giving the ball to Oklahoma in advantageous situations. Oklahoma was not driving for the most part in this game, but it just wasn't going to be enough either way. And look, we talked about it yesterday on College Football Game Time, myself and John Fricky. It's just one of those things where on a given day, who's going to have their A game? And there just doesn't seem to be a team, maybe Ohio State, maybe Oregon, that plays with any level of consistency. And just on a good day, we've said at times, Alabama looks like they could win the national championship. We've also yesterday included to take a look at them and be like, what the hell team is that? They don't belong to be in the playoffs, and after this loss, they probably won't be, or potentially won't be. And it's just, how do you kind of measure out who's going to bring what on a given day? I think that's going to be probably a topic over the next couple of games that we talk about, is just who brings it on a given day. Alabama didn't, and Oklahoma, as tough of a season as they've had, good enough yesterday to get the win. And a nice little apex of the season there for the Sooners.
Yeah, and I want to talk about Xavier Robinson as well. This is a guy who was like the fourth, fifth, sixth string guy. Wasn't even supposed to be in this game, but you have injuries, and he was ready. And Oklahoma, huge credit to them, because, I mean, Brent Venables was somebody who I felt like was, if anybody was going to be fired in the SEC this year, I felt like Brent Venables was higher on that list of coaches who could be fired. And Xavier, he steps up in a big way in this game, and it's just a nuts football game. I just, to get this badly beaten is just, I never saw this. I never saw this coming, because Alabama wasn't able to get anything going at all. And it was 10-3, and I felt like something was coming, but then Jalen Miller drops back and throws another interception. And I don't know what Alabama is. This is the most up and down team, because when they're at their best, you see what they did against Georgia. When they're at their best, you see what they did against LSU or against Missouri, which Missouri even still was like not what that game was, not even as bad as that score might have indicated. But Alabama's just an average football team. And I have this question too, and I texted you this last night, and you just sort of alluded to it right there. I said, does the SEC have an elite team? Like, are they just kind of average? And you said, is there anybody who's anything but average? And I think it's an interesting point, because there are a lot of teams this year who feel like when they're at their best, they're pretty damn good. But when they're at their worst, anybody can beat them. And I mean, literally anybody can beat them. Alabama at their worst this season, you saw what they did against South Carolina. That was an ugly football game. They've had a lot of games like that. But then they go on the road and they get smacked around by Vanderbilt, by Tennessee. Now you get smacked in probably the worst way possible by Oklahoma. I just have this question: like, is there anybody who is going to be able to be elite when it's all said and done out of the SEC?
Well, look, ultimately someone's going to win the national championship, whether it's someone from the Big Ten, SEC, or shoot, man, the way Notre Dame's playing, I'll put them back into the discussion. They were impressive last night. Look, it's really going to be about who brings their closest to the top level of possible performance when these games matter. Because right now you go down the list and you could look at probably 6 or 7 teams that you're like, I don't know, like on a given day, if they have it, they could probably win. Like certainly for Oregon, certainly for Ohio State. I think Texas, I think Georgia. I think Notre Dame, like on a given day, if they have their A game and another team doesn't, like no one's infallible. And with the exception of one game for Oregon, they've at least kind of brought it. And I know they had I kind of getting rid of the early season stuff just in terms of them having not figured it out. But it's tough to feel like who's got consistency and able to bring it week in, week out.
Yeah, and credit to Oklahoma for, I mean, they took it to Alabama and they found something that worked, and it was that rushing attack, and it worked in a big way. Something that wasn't working, Jackson Dart yesterday, the 24-17, Ole Miss falls to Florida. Ole Miss had several opportunities in this game to ice it right there at the end and potentially save it. And Jackson Dart threw 3 interceptions over like a span of 120 seconds. One was an ill-advised throw he made into the end zone that Florida intercepted. Another one was, and then you have 2 that are, one was overturned and said it was an incomplete catch, and everyone started like celebrating and going crazy. Then Jackson Dart gets another opportunity, and he drops back and throws another interception. What is Lane Kiffin? What are these Ole Miss Rebels? They're extremely talented, but they are extremely inconsistent. But credit to Billy Napier, credit to Florida. This is a team that's turned around their season in such a monumental way. And if I hadn't already cast my votes for Coach of the Year, Billy Napier would be potentially on that list. It's what he has done this year to turn the fortunes of that program, a team that we thought very realistically could win 2, maybe 3 games. And we thought that he might be fired by mid-October, but instead he keeps his job. DJ Lagway, he's tremendous. I mean, the stats may not indicate that he was out of his mind good. Montrell Johnson, he is tremendous in this game. You have a core here. You have a group of young players who could potentially continue to grow. Jaden Baugh is that guy on that rushing attack. I mean, of course, Montrell Johnson's a little older. He's going to be moving on after this season, but you've got some cogs in this machine here. And what you did to Ole Miss there, you shut down that rushing attack. They were only able to get 70 yards rushing from their running backs. You know, Jackson Dart accounts for the vast majority of those yards. Most of that came on one run. You know, I mean, this was just a fantastic football game from Florida, and they flipped the SEC, continue to flip it on its head.
Well, a couple of things here. Red zone failures for Ole Miss was the downturn in this game. They were stopped by Florida on fourth and distance a couple of times, 4th and 1, 4th and 2, once or twice, and then it kind of got to the point where you're like, what are you going to do if you're Ole Miss? Look, inspired defensive effort. We talked about it. If Ole Miss doesn't bring their A game, if Florida does, then that's what's going to happen. We've seen this twice now from Ole Miss. This was the 3rd time, and it's cost them all 3 times. Ole Miss has not been, and we talked about this before. We talked about this with Oregon when they stayed undefeated a couple of weeks ago. They didn't have their A game. They found a way to win. When Ole Miss has not had their A game, they have lost those 3 times, and not against great opponents, not terrible teams, but teams they should be beating. What was it? Kentucky, Arkansas, and Florida now. And honestly, Florida might be the best of those 3 that they've lost to.
LSU.
LSU. I couldn't remember who it was.
They smacked Arkansas.
I knew it was somewhere. I knew it was somewhere after the.
No, you're good.
But look, they didn't bring their A game, and when they don't have their A game, they're not very good. Part of this falls on Jackson Dart. Not a good performance from him. Part of it falls on Lane Kiffin. Sometimes you got to take the points if you're not able to run the ball in 4th and short there, and that certainly cost them. But inspired effort from the Gators. I talked to my father. He was almost at a loss for words of what's happened with the Gators since Scott Strickland announced that Billy Napier is going to, we'll
forget the Texas
since
game.
the Texas game. Yeah, since the Texas game.
But I mean, DJ Lagway didn't play in that game. That's not a.
No, look, you probably weren't beating Texas anyways the way that they played, but there's something cooking at Florida. The question is to what extent. I mean, is 8 wins possible next year? 9? Are you in like? Look, they're good. They should beat Florida State. There's an opportunity for Florida to end this season ranked. I actually wouldn't be surprised if potentially this week they're the highest ranked, if they get ranked, the highest ranked 5-loss team in the country.
They'll get some votes.
Yeah, I think so.
Get votes.
And I would imagine if they beat Florida State and a couple other teams lose, they may find themselves in the back end of the rankings. So pretty good in-season turnaround job for Billy Napier.
Hey, Abe, if Missouri can still be ranked, then Florida might have an opportunity to do it. But no, this is a game that Ole Miss lost this football game, and it's so ugly. I mean, you mentioned the red zone woes. You're in the red zone 3 times, and you don't score, and it's not. It's just an ugly football game, you know. And there's no excuse for Lane Kiffin anymore. I don't know. I understand you have miscues, you have drops. I mean, some of the drops were pretty nasty. here in this game. I mean, Jordan Watkins dropped a couple, Juice Wells dropped a couple, Daquan Wright, Trey Harris, he dropped some, and Trey Harris also went down with another injury in this game. I mean, you've had injury woes slap you in the face as soon as this team finally got healthy, it seemed like. And I mean, Jackson Dart seemed like he was doing a lot of this on his own, and then at the end it just kind of came crashing down. But Lane Kiffin, I have questions about this guy, man. I mean, this 12-team playoff and this team, you might have one of the most talented teams. No, like I'm talking like top 2, and they may not be number 2 in college football in terms of talent. And the fact that you're not able to bring it on a week-to-week basis is so mind-numbing to me. I don't understand what the problem is. You've got an elite quarterback. You have an elite receiving core. You have a strong rushing attack. Your trenches are beefed up. And we've seen what they look like when they play their best. But why can't you bring that? I don't understand where the disconnect is for Lane Kiffin and this team. It's not that you're lacking talent. It's not that it's not a good football team. And it's not that you're playing elite competition on a week-to-week basis. All due respect to Florida, but this isn't a team that you need to lose to. Florida's playing very confident football, and that's very valuable. But to lose this type of game and to do it because of self-made errors, lots of unforced errors here for Ole Miss, and it's another reason why they lose.
Yeah, I think you're overstating a couple things. These are still college kids. They're not professionals. They are going to make mistakes. I do think the transfer portal thing is something you're going to find out more about over the next couple of years. What you lose by bringing in top-tier talent from the transfer portal in too much of a number is culture. Guys that have grown up in the program. And I think you're going to see that with teams like Georgia, who are still – using recruiting and development as a bigger tool than the transfer portal. I just think it's tough to fake and tough to build, no matter how talented a guy is that comes into the program and slides into that starting role, whatever. If you got the right culture, I think you can avoid some of these things. But again, it's cost Ole Miss. There have been other teams, it should have cost Georgia. It should have cost Oregon, like to not have their A game. Like Georgia very easily could have lost to Kentucky. Or Oregon a couple of weeks ago, what was that, Wisconsin? They could have lost to Wisconsin.
The thing is, you find a way to win, and that's Ole Miss has not been able to do that. That's the point.
I agree with that, but I'm just suggesting, like, we keep like dumping on Ole Miss for not having their A games. Like they're like we talked about. Like,
I'm
there's
saying
plenty of
I'm not
teams that
dumping
haven't
them
had
for
their
not
A
having
game.
their A game. I'm not dumping on them for that. I'm dumping on them on not having their A game and then finding creative ways to lose.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think you're overstating the talent on this team to begin with. I think they win this game if Trey Harris doesn't go down. Like it's just a bad run of circumstance. But yeah, I mean, they weren't good enough. I don't think they've been good enough in the run game all season. They're using a damn defensive tackle to try and pick up power run yardage. Like that's not good enough. Like I don't think they're as good as you're making them out to be. You're like, they might be one of the 2 best teams and not number 2. Like no, they're not even in this discussion. I think they've got a couple of players that are uber talented, but they're not the second best, most talented roster in the country. Like I don't believe that one bit. I don't think they're the second most talented roster in the SEC. I mean, they are number 1 in their own state. I will give them that, but Mississippi State can't quite measure up. But like, yeah, I think you're overstating a little bit just how good this team is, and I don't know if that's fair to Lane Kiffin either.
No, this is the most. Well, I think what we can definitively say, because you can't really measure talent. I can
throw you rosters. Whose roster would you rather have, Ole Miss or Georgia?
That also brings.
Whose roster would you rather have, Ole Miss or Ohio State? Ole Miss or Oregon? Like they're not number 2. I'd probably take Texas over them.
But one thing that is definitively true is that this is the most talented team that Lane Kiffin has ever had, and they still lose 3 games.
They would be if Trey Harris could ever stay on the field.
Well, shoulda, woulda, and coulda. You got like 4 other like dudes on that receiving core, and
they ain't a dude like him on that team. Or
Trey Harris. Trey Harris is one of the best wide receivers in all of college football, and I look, he's an All-American potentially, even having missed like 4 or 5 games. Like that's how good he was for them when he was healthy. And we'll see with everything. And I mean, Ole Miss has a lot of, they got to answer some questions there this offseason. It's going to be They have to figure something out because this was a season that I felt like was going to be a magical one for Ole Miss potentially, and they just continue to find they just came off the rails, and they looked so damn good when they played Georgia. They looked so damn good when they ran through some of those games this week when it was all clicking. This is a dominant team. They were good in the trenches. They were good outside. They were good quarterback position, and it just wasn't meant to be against the Florida Gators this week. Last one here in the SEC is this weekend of reckoning took place. Auburn takes down Texas A&M. Now, Texas A&M is in a situation where they need to win a conference championship if they want to proceed and push on and potentially make a college football playoff. But that's it. That's the only thing that they have to hope on because this just eliminated any at-large hope that Texas A&M might have had. At 3 losses, it's just not going to be enough. It's the third 3-loss team that we have added to that tally in the SEC. But for Auburn, this is the best I've seen them. And they played more of a complete game than we've seen them play this year. And it wouldn't be a unique situation to see them blow a double-digit second-half lead. They've done it twice already this season against Missouri and against Oklahoma. But like I said, this is the best game I've seen from Peyton Thorne. Cam Coleman has he started to deliver on some of that talent, and like this is a guy who in his last 2 games, 15 receptions, 228 yards, and 5 touchdowns. He's become the favorite target for Peyton Thorne. And Jarquez Hunter, we know he's a beast. He goes over 100 yards again in this one. They race out to that 21-point lead, but it was maybe early in that third quarter that they found themselves in that familiar spot. We were texting back and forth, and I was pretty sure that they were going to lose this game. I thought that they were going to choke this one away. But Hugh Freeze, he holds on despite 296 yards from the Aggies in the second half. They hold on in a crazy, crazy finish. 4 overtimes. Auburn takes down Texas A&M, and it's the third crowd rush that we see on Saturday.
Yeah, look, terrible start for Texas A&M, and you look at it, you're like, man, everyone warned you all week about a look ahead or coming in sleepy, and you certainly did that. They got it going, and I was surprised that Auburn went the other way and was able to pick it back up themselves after they did blow a big lead. Turned into a really good game, and you're right. The difference here, because Auburn defensively has been kind of stingy all year long to an extent. The problem has been their offense has put them in such bad situations, be it turnovers or just general field position, time of possession, stuff like that. But they were able to pick it up. This is probably, as you mentioned, their best offensive performance under Peyton Thorne. He looked like an actual SEC quarterback for the first time probably this season. So really impressive for them to knock out A&M. And I just for A&M to fall into this trap game thing the way they did, despite warnings all week long, really did surprise me. You talk about Ole Miss has no business losing to a Florida team. Texas A&M has no business losing to this Auburn team. But the difference between Ole Miss and Texas A&M, as you also pointed out, all is not lost for the Aggies. It is still a situation of win and they're in. They'll have to take care of Texas. They would then also have to take care of Georgia in the SEC title game. But there is still a path for them, albeit not an easy one.
Yeah, it looks like that this was going to be the first season that the SEC title game was going to be without Georgia for the first time since 2020, I believe, when the Gators made it. But no, never mind. You just have sheer carnage, and all 3 of these results had to happen for Georgia to make it into the SEC championship game, and all 3 did. Now they're in. They'll be facing the winner of Texas A&M and Texas in 2 weeks' time in Atlanta. But this was a gut punch game for Texas A&M. Marcel Reed, they got off the deck slow, and I know you mentioned it was you thought it was intentional by Mike Elko, the Freudian slip or so. No, maybe it was just a Freudian slip. And I think they really did have their focus ahead of Auburn and looking into what they were going to have to face against Texas. And it was early that it became increasingly obvious that was going to be the case, because I mean, you race out to a 21-0 deficit. You're running backwards and you're putting yourself in a hole. But Texas A&M also shows how good they can be when they're good and how bad they can be when they're bad. And it's just an interesting football team because it's just sort of been who they are, and when Marcel Reed was able to get out and run, that's where this team actually found its next gear. 200, almost 300 yards after halftime. It just shows how bad they were before the half. But ugly performance here from Texas A&M, from Ole Miss, and most of all from Alabama. The SEC, I wonder how many teams do you think actually get through to the playoff at this point, Abe?
It's still going to be 4.
I think 4 is probably your number, and I think that anybody who might have had a qualm with 4 or saying that they might get 5, or maybe they get 6. They were never going to get 6.
They were never going to get 6.
They're
There was
never
a
gonna
world in which they got 5.
Yes, but
that
that's
obviously does not exist anymore, and it would have required and still would require Notre Dame to lose, and that's just not happening anymore.
Yeah, I mean, if Notre Dame loses next week to USC, they should be out of the tournament entirely, in my opinion. But whether that happens or not, I think remains to be seen. But the SEC it just played itself into a pretty big hole. But the same can also be said in the Big 12. But at least we got some answers there. They muddled themselves up in the process. Arizona State, they find themselves on top of the Big 12 with that 28-23 win. It was a game that had some kind of weird theatrics there at the ending. It was a game, one of many games that we saw on Saturday, where fans rush the field early. They have to get pulled off the field, and then they get to rush the field again right after that. And BYU, they made it very interesting. They outscore Arizona State 20-7 in the second half. And I think that had a lot more to do with Dillingham taking his foot off the gas. And then it looks like they were going to be fine right there at the end. They pick off Jake Retzlaff, his second interception of the game. And they get the ball up to like the 10-yard line or something, and then just run backwards on 2 plays. And then they take a bunch of false starts, and then they run backwards again. And then they just throw the ball up in the air, and they hope that that's going to be enough. But the ball hits an object out of bounds with 1 second left. And it felt very much like it was going to be effectively what happened. Like remember, if anybody remembers one of the craziest plays in college football history, we have the kick 6 where Nick Saban's on the sideline of the Iron Bowl lobbying for that extra second to be put on the clock. And then it is, and then he has the kick, and then ends up costing them the game. But it didn't happen to Arizona State. It would have been a little inverse action there. But BYU has 1 second to do it. Jake Retzlaff guns it, and he just doesn't have enough arm, and they fall in this one. 28-23 over Arizona State takes down BYU 28-23. They are on top of the Big 12. As of right now, they still got to get a win against Arizona next week to clinch that spot. But we'll see. Should be interesting. I think actually they might have they clinched in this one.
They didn't. They didn't because of Colorado's loss. It turned into a mess. They presented this game all week as the winner goes into the Big 12 title game. And then when all is said and done, they went back and looked at the tie-breaking procedures like, oops, we missed one. Never mind. Look, the story that now they do have their own, they control their own destiny, and none of the other Big 12 teams can say that. Well, I guess one other can, but I think that's Iowa State. The moral of this game, or the story of this game, is what happened at the end with Kenny Dillingham and the decision making. And they get the turnover, they get it down to the 5 or 7 yard line, and they did something wrong on every single down after they got the ball. If you're going to run the ball on first down, that's fine. You need to also be running it on second and third down, not running backwards. Take a field goal, make it an 8-point game, try and run out the clock, take whatever you're going to do. Don't do that. Don't put yourselves in any situation. And it's one of the biggest head scratching decisions really since Miami didn't take knees last year against Georgia Tech. And you're like, what are you guys doing? Like, how do you not know time and situation and management? But it really, honestly, I got to a point where I was like, screw these guys. I hope they lose because of this. I hope BYU actually completes a Hail Mary just to kind of stamp on how stupid Kenny Dillingham's management late game was. But Arizona State, by far the better team. Scatterbo absolutely dominated this game. I think he went over 140, may have been over 150 yards. I don't remember what the eventual total was. A boatload of carries as well. But dominant win. The scoreline, I think BYU did climb back in it because, as you mentioned, Arizona State took their foot off the gas. If they score that touchdown right at the end, and it's not really there. But some very, very head-scratching decisions from Dillingham. But Arizona State does look like the class of the Big 12 right now, and they've got an opportunity to clinch their spot in the Territorial Cup against Arizona next week.
Yeah, and look, it's the same trio. You mentioned Scatterbo. I mean, he goes for 147 yards and 3 tutties there, but it's that trio that's effectively got it done all season for them, or at least the second half of the season, where Arizona State's been the best team in the Big 12, including last week. Sam Leavitt, Levitt, I mean, he did have his first interception of his last like 3 games or so, and they held him down in check pretty well. But I think that had a lot more to do with the fact that you're playing a BYU team that likes to get takeaways, and they got one of those takeaways in this game. But when Scadaboo's running like that, and you're going for about a buck 50 there, then this team is just run the ball. Just run the ball and you'll be fine. This was a dominant win for Arizona State. And you mentioned it, Abe. It's not as dominant as the score might indicate here, 28-23, but Arizona State was definitively the better football team. And they've been very good at home, mind you. I mean, this is a squad that was undefeated 6-0 at Arizona State. But Jordan Tyson's that third horseman in that little triumvirate that they have on offense. They were very impressive in this game. They've been very impressive down the stretch, and Dillingham has done a great job. It would have been a damn shame if they found one of the most creative ways to lose this game that I've seen. Just run the damn ball. Like, it's not that complicated, and there's a reason people do that whenever it gets to the end of a game. Run the ball. We've seen so many people run into that situation. Even if you need the ball, like you mentioned, like just drop a knee, kick a field goal, just move on. Even that's better than what you did. You had a chance to just outright lose this football game. It was nuts, and it was unnecessarily nuts, but it is all for naught. Arizona State, I think they've effectively clinched it. You do need to go get the win, and if you win next week, then you would win the tiebreakers, and you'd be on top there. Iowa State was the other team you mentioned. You need Iowa State to now lose if you were BYU or you're Colorado, because, oh my God, Kansas just laid it on Colorado in this game. They ran past them. The rushing attack just crushed him. 3 ranked opponents in consecutive weeks for Kansas. They become the first team ever as a sub 500 team to beat 3 ranked opponents in 3 straight weeks in college football history. And it was the fact that Devin Neal just dominates. 4 touchdowns, 207 yards. He also adds 80 yards receiving and another touchdown. Kansas controlled the ball for 40 minutes. They piled up 331 yards on the ground. They finished with 520 yards of total offense. And now, believe it or not, this is a team that was left for dead. They were 2-6, Abe. Now they're 5-6, and all they got to do is go beat Baylor next week, and then they make a bowl game. And one funny story from this one that popped up, I saw it on social media, was like one of the Kansas beat writers or something. The Kansas punter, Damon Graves, his family is from Australia. They're all from Australia, right? But they made the trip from Australia to Kansas City for this game against Colorado. And the drives for Kansas proceeded to go touchdown, field goal, touchdown, field goal, touchdown, touchdown, end of game. Notice the theme there? They didn't punt a single time in this game. They scored on every single possession except for the one where they take out the clock and it ends the game. This was a beatdown of epic proportions. They got blasted in this football game. Colorado is now, they had a chance to do it, and they had the ball in their hands, and all they had to do was take a couple steps forward, and they had a potential chance to make the college football playoff. They fumbled the ball, like Deion Sanders said after the game, and it's not over. It's not over for Colorado, but they just hit a big hurdle.
Yeah, the biggest issue for me with Colorado, and we've talked about it, they obviously can't run the ball, and I think we've settled in the fact that they can't run the ball. I'm okay with the idea that they can't run the ball. You can't abandon the run just because it's not working. This is a team that ran the ball 12 times, I think, but the majority of that was Shedeur Sanders, both in terms of carries and in terms of yards. Only 8 carries from running backs over the course of this game. And whether it's working or not, you need to at least try to get a couple of carries in there to keep things honest, because Shedeur actually played pretty good. No interceptions, 3 touchdowns, 23-29, pretty good efficiency. Travis Hunter was obviously a demon on the outside as well, but you got to run the ball a little bit more, even if it's not working. Other than that, in terms of Kansas, look, I'll continue to say it. I've said it the past 2 weeks. I'll say it now for a 3rd straight time. This is the team Kansas expected to be. It was the 5 straight losses or 6 straight losses and 7 out of 8, whatever the numbers are. That was more surprising in the middle of their season. But we all expected Kansas to be this team. It's a little late for that now in terms of their own season. But no one's really surprised that Kansas able to win these games in the stretch, only because it was what happened during the middle portions and early part of the season for them that really got them off kilter. But Lance Leipold's still a very good coach. That's not a surprise. Jalen Daniels is 3 years worth of being a Big 12 preseason player of the year. That's not a surprise. And we know what Devin Neal's been as well. So nothing overly surprising. Like we've seen some other teams, Colorado maybe starting to smell themselves a little bit. That's in the words of Dion, not myself, and it caught up with them. But still a very good season for them, even if they're not able to find a way into the Big 12 title game.
Yeah, and I think this is just just an ugly football game from Colorado, and you nailed it. You hit it on the head. You got to be able to run the ball. You got to be able to at least have an opportunity to run the ball, because if you're that one-dimensional by choice, then this is the kind of thing that happens.
By the way, like Shador was a magician yesterday. Like I know they didn't win the game. They only, I think, sacked him one time. The fact that he wasn't sacked 5 times, like if you were watching him dance around back there and run around and keep his eyes downfield, and it was a nightmare for him. Mm-hmm. He did everything he could. It wasn't because of him, including take a very vicious, dirty hit down low.
So, that was nasty. That was a nasty hit that he took.
And so Shador almost impressed me more in this game than in any game he's performed in this season.
Yeah, I mean, because you have a defense that's getting after you, and they know that you're not going to run the ball because you can't, first off, and then you won't, second off. And you drop back and you're just doing yourself a disservice. And Shador, for him to be able to do what he did in this game, despite that, is a testament to him. Travis Hunter, they knew the ball was going to be coming to him. They couldn't stop him. I mean, he's got the Heisman Trophy all but locked up at this point. And I mean, Ashton Jeanty played a fantastic football game while he was banged up. But I think the hay is pretty much in the barn here as it stands right now. And it sucks for Ashton Jeanty, who's having a historic season of his own. But Travis Hunter's he's got it locked up here at this point. But let's jump in here to our Week 13 shout-outs as we round out the College Football Overtime podcast. Week 13 reaction show would not be the same without a Week 13 shout-out. Abe, I'm going to go first this time because you went first last week, and that's how fairness works. The Nebraska Cornhuskers were 0-8 in bowl-clinching scenarios over the last 2 seasons. That is until yesterday. 44-25, they take down Wisconsin. They're bowling for the first time since 2016, and they rushed the field to celebrate. And for anybody who uses the phrase meaningless bowl games, anybody who uses that phrase, just get it out of your vernacular because they mean something and they are important. Just look at the legacy team, the legacy program, Nebraska, the way that those players, the way that those fans, they all celebrated after they clinched a bowl game for the first time. It's been a while for Nebraska. It's been a long couple of years, and Matt Rule finally gets them back into a bowl game. They all celebrate. They rush the field. And look, it's fantastic, and we love it. It's why we love college football. But they go bowling for the first time in a long, long time. And so shout out to the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Abe, what you got?
Yeah, I'll give a shout out for the second time this year to a squad a little bit north of us, but not by much. Kennesaw State picks up their second win of the season. A game of runs against Florida International. They open up 17-6. They then allow 20 unanswered to FIU, but they close with the second half of the fourth quarter. They scored a touchdown and a field goal with a minute left there to pick up a 1-point victory. So Kennesaw State, who did fire head coach Brian Bohannon with an interim head coach, picks up their second win in FBS history at home over FIU. So congratulations to them.
Huge win for Kennesaw State. First season in FBS. It's not really been awesome. You've already had a coach firing, but you do have a win over Liberty. It's a pretty big feather in their cap. And it's not going to be the only win. So big credit to the Owls up there at Kennesaw State. But that's been the College Football Overtime Week 13 reaction show. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Garrett Chapman. His name is Abe Gordon. We got another big one coming up this weekend. It's rivalry week. It's one of my favorite weeks of the year, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So make sure you make sure you subscribe, follow along. We're going to continue our conversation. Abe Gordon, Garrett Chapman right here on the College Football Overtime podcast. Thanks so much for listening. We will see you again this week.